Welcome to the Strangers on the Way podcast. I'm so honored and excited and humbled to have today's guest joining us. I think you're one of the most brilliant thinkers of today's day and age that I know of. I met Dele Okuwobi in Chicago at a conference, and it was actually quite amazing. We ended up sitting next to each other at our table at this conference, and as Daly started talking, I just felt like my heart light up. And I ended up being in tears, which is pretty normal for me when the presence of God is near. And yeah, it was just a divine appointment. You know how we have those sometimes. And he shared just some wisdom with me that really helped shape a lot of this season for my life. And so, Daly, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here. So grateful.
Yeah, it's awesome to be here. Awesome to meet your audience and all the people who watch this great podcast. Great to be with you guys.
Thank you. Would you start just sharing with our listeners a little bit snapshot of who you are, anything that you love, anything you're passionate about, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I would describe myself probably as a creator builder. That's probably the best word to describe who I am. At my core essence, I create and I build. And then if you want to attach the ideas of people, places, and things, that's what I do. So whether it's a person, a place, or a thing, I'm going to create and I'm going to build. So you
Hmm.
can see how that framing expands for people to kind of get a grasp of who I am. So, for example, like I love to build furniture. So that's a thing. So if you give me some wood, I'm going to build something, right? So it
Yes.
doesn't matter if it's a person, a thing, or a place. If I'm in that environment, I'm either going to create or I'm going to build,
Hmm.
which naturally really lets me know that framing lets me know what spaces I'm welcome at and what spaces I'm not. So any space that's hostile to creating or building, um, I just know that that's not the best environment.
That's so good. I'm so curious. As a child, were you like this? Were you like a creator builder, even with either concepts or Legos or
No, I was not.
okay.
But I figured out I did some work and I figured out why. I not why. I think there's a part of me that maybe there's natural bits of this, but I also think it was environmental. So no, I did not do any of that as a kid. Actually, as a kid, I didn't even play with toys as a kid. I had zero, like I didn't play with toys. That just
Hmm.
wasn't in my childhood upbringing. Toys,
Yeah,
like what's that, right?
yeah.
Um, but what I noticed is there's in human psychology and behavior, sometimes what we're not able to access, we we can develop that in like a in like a we'll develop other gifts. So as a kid and growing up, I was not able to create and build. So I saw every opportunity to create and build, but I couldn't do it. So it's almost like growing up, seeing every opportunity and everything to create and build, but you couldn't access it. So then when you finally could, it's like a floodgate opens up that's just always been there. It just didn't have the expression. And like anything that's created, most things that's created, they are created from real creators or real builders. When they create, their creation doesn't stop creating. So real creation is ever creating, like from true eonic builders, right? Or eonic creators. When they create, like when you see an artist, a real artist who's found their eye, that photo that they create, you can look at it 10,000 times. It'll create a different feeling in you. Like that's real art. It's just, you can stare at it for 3 hours. And so I think for me, the more creativity and building is unleashed, it actually grows exponentially, if that makes sense.
That's so good. That's
Mhm.
beautiful. Do you
Yeah.
remember the like moment when you first kind of got unleashed in this?
Whoa, what was the moment? I think it was probably several years of realizing started off slowly. It started off thinking like, oh my gosh, you're hubris or you're prideful,
Mm,
because I kept thinking internally through myself in my later adult years, like, I don't think there's a problem I can't solve. And I was like, well, that's prideful, right?
mhm,
Who says that kind of stuff, right? But as I kept going through interactions, I just kept understanding that, like, I have a unique way of providing answers and solutions.
mm,
And I think eventually, as the years go by, I began to realize, wow, you create and build to provide answers and solutions.
mm,
That's not prideful. That's who you are. You wouldn't, I mean, you can be prideful, but here's the thing. I think really truly gifted people, this is I don't think they can be prideful. I'll
mm,
say that again. I don't think truly gifted people can be prideful. It would be like me telling you, like, oh my gosh, you're so prideful about how good you drive a car. It's like, how could you
mm,
be prideful about that? Like, millions of people have a driver's license. Like, you love how I yield, you love how I stop at red lights. It's like, you can't be prideful about something that's so easy. So I
mm,
think true creatives and true gifted people, they're not prideful about their gift because it's so easy.
mm,
I think it's the people who struggle at what they create and struggle at what they build. And when they finally create something, if that's your gift or that's the gift you're seeking, you're prideful about that creation because you can't do it naturally.
mm.
So
Interesting.
I think true gifted people, like elite gifted people at whatever their thing is, deep down in their core, they can't, they're not prideful. I'll give you another example. If you take an athlete that's really good at what they do, typically they spend thousands of hours in the gym.
Mhm,
So when they hit that game winning jump shot, yeah, they're excited, but they've been humbled by getting up. Michael Phelps getting up so early, practicing. There's a certain kind of humility with
hmm,
truly gifted people.
yeah.
You don't have to chip them down a notch. The process of becoming what they are already chipped them down. So
Mm,
that's why if you meet a truly great person, they will seem prideful.
hmm,
And that pride is not pride, it's actually the glory in what they know they're good at, but they know their goodness or their greatness has nothing to do with them, which
yeah.
is like, what?
That's so well said. I love that so much. So well said. What have you created or built that you're most proud of?
Yeah, that's a great question. What have I created or built
And it could
that
be like people,
most,
place, thing. I know business. I know.
you know, I have to say, I don't think I can name any one thing.
Sure.
What I do think I am most proud of is understanding that the process, understanding that creating and build, okay, I'm most proud of understanding that there is a true framework and a process to creating and building.
Hmm.
That's the key that I'm most proud of. And what do I mean by that, right? So, like, when you create and build anything, there's a process to it, right? One of those processes, like, is what I want to create just for me? Is it just for me? If that's the case, then, like, there's so many restraints that goes out the window.
Yeah.
Like, just have fun, right?
Yeah.
So it's a process. You need to know that. Versus, is this for my a larger audience? That's
Hmm.
a process thing. Then the idea is like, is what I'm creating or building, is it for revenue generation? Is it to help other people? Well, if it has to do with other people, you better validate that concept
Hmm.
before you release it to the general public and hurt people. So I think what I'm most proud of is really understanding that true creators and builders, they honor and respect that there's a process to it, and that kind of demystifies creators and builders because they think like, oh my God, they just write awesome song. Every song is a hit. Yeah, every song is a hit that they write, but they didn't tell you about the 50,000 songs that they wrote that were terrible. So in the midst of failure in creating and building, so I guess to answer your question, what am I most proud of? Now I can answer your question now that I thought of it. I'm most proud of all the things that didn't work.
Wow.
I am most proud of all the failures that like people don't want to talk about. I am most proud because it's through those things not working that you build up the resilience, and your first validation is to your own self. Who cares what the world thinks? When you
Mm,
put something out there and it's terrible and you yourself knows it's terrible, can you validate to your own self through your own personal misdirection or failure that I still need to stick with this idea?
mm,
And then do you know when to actually give up on an idea and say, maybe I just missed it? So I think to answer your question, in creating and building, what am I most proud of? I'm most proud of understanding that it's a process and
mhm,
understanding that sometimes something not working out is in a sense part of the process. It's almost like creators and builders, they're almost scientists who don't get the freedom to explore in the lab.
hmm,
Because a scientist, you never fault a scientist for 10,000 failures. You're like, you're supposed to experiment. And
yeah,
so a scientist, because of the label scientist, they get rewarded for thousands of failures. They actually get more money
mm,
to
to
keep
keep trying.
trying till they create a product that works. But by the virtue of label of a creator and builder, it's an unhidden truth that creators and builders are actually truly scientists.
Wow.
So they don't get the credit for their failed experiments.
Right.
It gets devalued. And then they tell creators and builders, well, you just need to get a real fill in the blank. You just need to grow up. You just need to. And it's like, that's telling a scientist, well, you just need to stop experimenting. And the
Yeah.
scientist is like, well, how do I know if I'm really going to solve the problem to cancer? You know,
Yes.
stopping a scientist from experimenting and stop funding a scientist to experiment figuring out the cure to cancer is the
Mm,
same thing as faulting a creator and builder for not having success.
wow. Wow.
So in essence, a creator and a builder, they're scientists that don't get the label, or labeling them as a creator and builder doesn't bring in this notion that they are true scientists. And
Mhm,
so, in actuality, every true gift has a scientific component of experimenting till you figure it out.
mhm. Yes. That's so good. Okay, so then if we've listeners that are like terrified of failure because of
Yeah,
upbringing or, you weren't
yeah,
allowed to fail in your family
yeah.
or like a traumatic experience in school, what do you tell them? Like, how do you overcome that?
Yeah. So there's a difference between failure and there's a difference between blowing up the lab,
Yeah.
right? You
Yeah.
shouldn't be afraid to blow up the lab,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because then you can't experiment anymore because you don't have a lab. That's
Yeah.
problematic. So I think what I would tell that person who's afraid of failure is realize that there is a difference between failure that this experiment didn't work, and there's a difference in failure where I tried this experiment and I blew up the lab. So
Mhm.
the way you negotiate that difference in the real world is for you to take calculated steps that if it doesn't work, you don't lose the lab. Because
Hmm.
if you lose the lab, you can no longer experiment. You're going to have to wait and write a big grant to get a new $30 million to build a new lab again. It's not that you won't get that grant, it's just that the whole process has stopped.
Mhm.
So I think, one of the things as a creator and builder, you have, knowing that you're also a scientist, you have to work into the equation risk mitigation.
Hmm.
You have to work into the equation risk mitigation and calculated steps, not because you don't want to be free to create, not because you don't want to be free to build, but sometimes a creator and builder has to realize, oh my gosh, if I try this experiment, it might blow up the whole lab. So maybe I should just put a little bit of this potion in there that won't blow up the lab. So the way that translates to somebody that has fear, if you have fear, you should ask yourself, is what I'm gonna be, is what I am afraid of gonna blow up the whole lab?
Hmm.
If it is, that's good senses. Don't blow up your lab. But if you're like, no, this is not gonna blow up the whole lab, oh, then do it. Go for it.
Mhm.
So my my uh, uh, concise response to what do you do with somebody who's afraid, just make sure that your fear is not validated, and you validate your fear by saying, if I do this, is it going to blow up the lab? Because if I blow up the lab, I can't experiment anymore. Then don't do it.
Yeah. That's
Don't do it. Because it may work, but it may not work, and
hmm
the risk of it not working is too great. And I think this is one of the biggest lessons creators and builders don't realize. They don't give themselves a safety net to build.
Mm.
You know,
Hmm.
it's like it's like that's like a creator and builder jumping out the plane without a parachute. So risk mitigation is the is likened to the parachute for jumping out the plane. Yeah, jumping out the plane is still scary with the parachute, but I've
Hmm.
mitigated my risk of failure because I have this parachute on. Now,
Hmm.
could the parachute fail? Yes, but it's like the best risk mitigation I can take for this extreme thing.
Hmm.
Creators and builders are doing extreme things, and I'm just saying, put on your parachute
Hmm.
to protect you from failure of falling. And at the end of the day, with the creator and the builder, if they still blow up the lab, and if you're listening to this, and if you've blown up the whole lab before, just realize blowing up the whole lab is painful, it's scary. You feel like you'll never be able to get the lab again. But here's the deal: blowing up the lab is the ultimate validation.
Hmm.
Because if you blew up the lab, that means you had enough courage to try a pretty big experiment.
Yeah.
And if you blew up the lab and you still feel passionate, that just may mean there's a divine calling to what you're supposed to do.
Wow.
And if I can tell you how many people have blown up labs and said, I can't shake this idea, I got to get back to it. I got to get back to it. And you raise the funds, you do what you got to do because you just might have the cure to cancer.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't mean, for anyone who's battling cancer right now, I don't mean to trigger you or traumatize you. I was using that analogy more so of I want there to be a solution for
Hmm.
that. And that would be a great thing for a creator and builder to accomplish.
Yeah. That's so good. Well, I know you have an organization called Wonder Association that really helps creators and builders
Mhm.
in this process. And it hasn't, there hasn't, I don't really know of many groups or organizations like yours. Could you share a bit about that? Like, how did it come to be?
Yeah, yeah. So, oh my gosh, Lauren, you asked some of the best questions, man. So,
Right.
um, how did it come? Share a little bit about it, and then how did it come to be? Sure, I'll share a little bit about it. Um, there are some facets of creating and building that there is a systematic approach to harness that creativity and that building.
Hmm.
So, for example, if you're a tech entrepreneur who also is a creator and a builder, there are infrastructures and systems set up for you, like Google, Silicon Valley, startup funds, that they will invest in the tech and give you all the money you need because that industry's creators and builders, it started about 25 years ago, and they've made so much capital that they easily recognize tech creators and builders when they have a great idea, and they'll give them 3 million, 10 million, $30 million to
Mm.
validate an idea because they built their whole system for that side of creators and builders. Another industry that has figured that system out is the music industry.
Hmm.
That's why it's called an industry, but it's specifically for creators or builders of music.
Hmm.
Another industry that's figured it out is acting. The you get Oscars if you're an actor. But when it comes to typically spiritual
Mm-hmm.
creators and builders, there's no industry.
Hmm.
As a matter of fact, the only industry that exists is the cannibalization of their gifts to create and build.
Hmm.
It gets eaten up in the environments that they're in, and it gets stifled.
Yeah.
And there's very little resources. So that's how it came to be. I came across that revelation. And of course, there's emerging people that's doing it now. And so I felt a impression in my heart
Mm-hmm.
to specifically build God's people,
Hmm.
to build. And the specific for your listeners who are listening, if you're not a people of faith, it's almost like a divine, you feel a divine purpose, you feel a divine calling, if you like, or if you like to use greater power, whatever. I like to name that greater power as Jesus. You may not, that's still okay. It's funny. If you don't believe in a greater power, it's still cool. That doesn't mean the greater power can't still speak. You know what I mean? And so for me, I think it was this idea of feeling this divine direction by the Lord to start something at a very small base to um to help creators and builders of faith get their thing out. And the specific command was build boats unto salvation, build
Hmm.
boats. And the idea behind that is if you read the Genesis story of the Christian Bible, there was a season where the whole world was just going astray. And this gentleman, Noah, built a boat to save people. And what's so funny about that story is on that boat, you would think Noah was a terrible communicator because it took him years to build that boat, and only 8 people got on that boat.
Hmm.
That means, Noah, you only convinced your own family? You're terrible. You built this massive boat and only 8 people got in. But the
Hmm.
reality of it, those 8 people was really not just 8, it was the whole world.
Hmm.
If you're looking at numbers, you only see 8. But if you see the impact of creating and building, it's the whole world.
Hmm.
And so for creators and builders of faith, what they build is not just about numbers. There's a greater thing that's coming that they've tapped into, that what they build is supposed to, in my opinion, help other people come to some kind of liberty.
Yes.
So for me, it makes sense to partner with these people to say, let's build your boat. Let's get your boat out there because I know if you build your boat, many people will jump on your boat for salvation and safety.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes. Yes.
And what I envision for Wonder, the big vision for Wonder, if you ever heard the term an armada is a fleet of ships, and they
Mm-hmm.
all sail together. But at any moment, a ship is independent, and they can say, "I'm going to go, 3 notches or kilometers over here. I'll
Mm-hmm.
see you guys up ahead." Right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's autonomy because they have their own ship, but their safety because they're part of this large fleet of ships, and they all sail together. And as you can see, the ocean is so wide open. There's no
Mm-hmm.
room to constrain anybody,
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
that's the vision.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that so much. It seems like uh timely, like
Yeah. Yeah.
for
Of
this
course. Of
season,
course.
in our world. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Hmm.
Well, I know you're also a man of prayer, and
Yep. Yep.
just the insight that you have is profound.
Yep.
Could you share just a little bit about like what you've learned through prayer And
Oh,
I
of
know it's very
course.
broad, but whatever comes to mind.
Yeah, yeah. I think what immediately comes, I'll frame it.
Hmm.
So I believe prayer is a satellite and a communication signal of back and forth communication with what I would consider heaven or the forces of good
Hmm.
to establish, to first hear what needs to be established here.
Hmm.
So my worldview is that the good that arises from here and all goodness comes from a good God source. And I fundamentally believe that all evil is inspired by an entity that is evil. Some may name it Satan or whatever. And so for me, I believe Earth is a neutral ground
Hmm.
and there are greater forces happening that are beyond us. I mean, think about it. You see in the newspaper some of the most horrific things, and
Yeah.
you're like, how did that happen? And
Yeah.
sometimes the person who did that atrocity is saying, I don't know themselves, right? So
Yes.
I see prayer as a place to get understanding of the goodness to bring and what is to be transformed here.
Hmm. Beautiful.
And I believe prayer is a place to get that understanding. And I believe is to be equipped to go do it. So I don't believe praying, for example, my philosophy of prayer, I do not see merit in praying for God to change anything on earth because I think it's the wrong emphasis. I do believe in praying that God would raise a mighty woman,
Hmm.
change something on earth.
Hmm.
I do believe that God to prayer for God to raise a mighty man to change something on earth. Why is that? As I look at human history, God has never fixed anything on earth by leaving heaven.
Hmm.
He always used a man.
Yeah.
So if you're a Christian, you might say, well, Dele, that's not true. God fixed stuff on earth by sending his son. But yeah, he used a man, he used a human.
Yeah.
Anything that gets even the greatest fix that God needed to fix, he used a person.
Yeah.
He sent his son. And
Yeah.
so my philosophy of prayer is prayer is where we link up satellite, we tune into God, get some good old fashioned instructions, and get some roadmaps and blueprints to fix earthly problems so that
Hmm.
people can have peace.
I love that. Oh, so good.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard it described like that, but oh my goodness, it's beautiful. So
Mm-hmm.
say we have a listener who's like really never seen prayer that way. Um, where do they start?
Yeah, I think um, it's probably first start acknowledging that they already do pray,
Hmm.
right? And so what that might be, life is a prayer.
Hmm.
You just don't know you're doing it.
Hmm.
So what does that mean? It means your behavior is moving something on this earth towards good or bad. You just haven't made the conscious decision to acknowledge it, even though it is.
Wow.
Every behavioral action is bringing something into this world. It's a creation.
Wow.
So I would rather link up my behavior actions to that. So what I would tell someone, if they're like, well, I don't really, I think you said they don't really pray or they're not really,
Or they never even saw prayer like this, like
they
kind of
never.
like yeah, they think it's just throwing it up on the wall and like, you know.
Yeah, what I would tell that person is first understand that like this is an emphasis of prayer, number one, and that helps them change. Number one, what I would tell that person, this paradigm shift changes your worldview, and you have to first acknowledge that because now you don't look at something that happens in the world and say, "Where is God?"
Hmm.
You're like, God had nothing to do with that evil, you know. The
Yeah.
second thing I would tell that person is, you know, they would approach prayer from a point of less talking now
Hmm.
and listening.
Yeah.
So, for example, why? So, like, how could I approach prayer with less talking and more listening when I have all these problems and I need like answers from God? Well, okay, um, how should I say this? Problems are solved by laws. If you break a law of a problem, no matter how much prayer you do, you can't solve that problem.
Hmm.
Let me give you a real example. Um, Problems are solved by law. So, for example, let's just say like there's nuance to everything, but what I'm saying is like there are certain natural solutions to certain problems that are okay. The law of gravity, right?
Yeah.
I want to fly a plane. I can pray to God all day to help me fly. That prayer is never going to get answered
Mm-hmm.
because there's a law working against me flying that God has put in place called the law of gravity. So
Hmm.
if I want to fly, what I need to do is get a bunch of creatives and builders together, get some airplane parts, and figure out how to break the law of gravity.
Hmm.
So the greater prayer is God, don't teach me how to fly necessarily, is God teach me how to make this plane stay up. Does that make sense? Which is, I think it's called like, don't hold me to this audience if I'm wrong. Things like the law of aerodynamics, lift and thrust, and
Sure.
lift, thrust plus, this, you now break the law. So in essence, God answered my prayer, but how did he answer your prayer? He
Hmm.
didn't come down and build a plane for you. You got the solution and the answer to deal with your problem of gravity.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so many earthly problems that require earthly solutions. And there's a bank of problems that require spiritual solutions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like the problem of like, you know, um, let's just say somebody as a child, okay, let me rephrase that. There's some emotional problems that you can't solve with like the law of gravity. That's what I'm trying to say. There are some soul wound problems that you need the wisdom of God to solve.
Mm.
And there's some real life problems like I need a job, but LinkedIn might help with that. you know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I need God to God can still help. There's balance, there's nuance. So what I'm trying to highlight is for that person who doesn't pray or is not used to seeing prayer this way, just realize there's certain things that only a divine answer can solve.
Hmm. Yeah. That's good. And how, if it's like a new muscle to start listening
Yeah.
versus first talking or writing,
Mm-hmm.
um, how did you start listening, or how can they
Oh,
practice that?
yeah. How do I start listening? I'll answer it in two ways. First, I believe that God is always speaking.
Yeah, it's good.
Number two, I believe you just have to tune in,
Mm-hmm.
you know? You just, I think so. So, how did somebody start? Just realize you're never alone.
Yeah.
You're never, ever alone. In those moments, if you would just hold tight and just give space to be directed and give space to be listened, you'll realize, oh my gosh, I feel this impression. I feel led to do this, I feel, and you can't even explain why. And you start testing those promptings,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll begin to start seeing, wow, I think this is divine.
Mm-hmm. So good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Would you say, I think something that really broke my box was that God will use many things to talk. So, like, literally, sometimes I feel like he speaks through nature or billboards or license plates, through the word, through songs. Like, I never realized, like, oh, he could use anything. And then I've start to build this relationship where I'm like, oh, that's him. Like, did anything like that happen in your life?
Yeah. I love how you described it. I see it from you painted a picture. We're both seeing the same picture of how God speaks. you described how that picture works, and that is perfect, is valid, and it needs to exist. May I describe how I see that same picture?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
I see that same picture as, and that God can speak through anything, but I funnel that through. He only speaks through one thing,
Hmm.
and that one thing is you.
Hmm.
He only speaks through one thing, and that, so basically, when he wants to see through, when he wants to speak to you, it's already in you.
Hmm.
So if I'm looking at a pot, I'm going to see that thing in that pot. If I'm looking at a billboard, the message is going to come out through a billboard.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm watching a TV show, so when God is wanting to speak, the message is often so clear, he can use anything to decipher it.
Hmm.
What you're calling and ascribing as many things is deciphering
Hmm.
of the same thing through a very pinpoint visual. So you see a billboard, the message is here, the billboard deciphered it.
Wow. Okay.
You're watching TV, the message is still there, the TV program deciphered it.
Hmm.
You have a vision, the same message, the vision just deciphered it. And
Hmm.
that's why people say, "Oh my gosh, God is speaking God is speaking to me through all these different methods." It's like, no, 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 no. You're deciphering God, how he's speaking to you through all the different messages.
Wow. But
You
it's inside.
It is inside.
It's resonating because it's inside you.
It's inside of you. You are the translator, not the billboard,
Hmm.
not the license plate. You're using those elements to decipher what's already there.
Wow. That's good. So then how do you pay more attention, I guess, to what is going on inside? Would that be a key?
How do you pay more attention to what is already happening inside of you? That's a very good, thank you. I think my response is, you have to somehow become aware that you're sharing space with deity,
Hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
You're sharing space. It's almost like if you're in an intimate relationship with somebody that's physically there. Sometimes, even a best friend, when I say intimate, I don't mean like,
Yeah.
whatever. Even a best friend doesn't have to say anything for you to know something's wrong.
Yeah.
You feel it,
Yeah.
you decipher it. So I
Yeah.
think it's just being aware of it and being sensitive, and not and realize, like, yeah, I can go to nature and God can speak to me there. That's awesome. Go to nature. But you could also just, sit at your backyard and look at a tree, and you'll decipher something through that stinking tree.
Hmm.
You could also, go watch a movie, and during that movie, something will be deciphered. It kind of frees you up to say, God is not in the billboard. God is not in the license plate with the numbers that matched up. God is not in the ocean, although he is in all those spaces. So one doesn't invalidate the other. This emphasis is just validating that you are the source
Hmm.
to which you can decipher God in everything. And that's why the Bible says God is everywhere in everything, because
Yeah.
he's in you.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's beautiful. I never thought about it that way, but that makes a ton of sense. Wow, I love that. So
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Well,
It's almost,
yeah.
sorry.
No, no, go
It's
ahead.
almost like this expression that first we shape our tools, then our tools shape us.
Hmm.
So someone shaped this tool,
Yep.
but this tool, it's shaping all of us,
Yeah.
because we all have hunchbacks now because we're like this.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
any tool that is created will always then shape the people.
Wow.
So that you are the decipherer. I mean, so the message is in you, and all these things are deciphering. So when the people who see God in numbers and license plates and all that kind of stuff, just know your way of seeing God in license plate, it shapes you because now you start looking for numbers everywhere.
Yes.
If you see God in nature, just realize that's shaping you because whenever you want to feel connected to God, you say, I need to go on a vacation. I need to just go, right?
Yeah.
You don't realize that the things that God is using to decipher the message for you, that's not the thing, although it is the thing. You
Mm.
really are the thing. So the emphasis is if you see God in nature and you don't have enough money to go on a vacation, don't freak out.
Yeah.
He'll use another method.
Yes. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's really neat. I had a friend that was imprisoned for about a year,
Yeah.
and I always thought about like Paul and like how did they not go insane?
Yeah.
But I think they probably tapped into
You
this.
got it.
Yeah, that's
He's
beautiful.
in me. Yeah,
Yeah,
where I go, he is.
yeah,
It's easier said than lived.
yes,
Mhm.
yes. Wow. Oh, so good. Well, as we wrap up, I love to ask our guests just any wisdom, last wisdom that they would want to share with our listeners. It
Oh,
could be on any topic.
wow, such
I
a
know, very broad.
um any wisdom. Can I have just a moment to think about it?
Absolutely.
Wow,
Yes.
what a great question.
And thank you so much for this is
Wow, yeah. Um, Here it is. All human beings were created for worship
hmm,
and to worship God.
hmm.
And how do you define worship? I'm going to give you a mathematical equation.
Love it.
Relationships plus work, the work that you do
Hmm,
equals worship.
hmm,
I'm going to say that again. Your relationships plus your work, those two together equals your offering back to God,
hmm,
which inevitably makes everyday worship because every day you're in relationship and every day you're working.
hmm,
And that's why God gave us the greatest commandment love Him and love your neighbor
hmm,
because every day you're in contact in relationship. So I think my greatest feedback that I can give or wisdom is love deeply those you're in relationship with because that's the greatest level of worship you can give is to love deeply.
hmm. Oh, beautiful.
Yep.
What a, yeah, a wonderful way to end.
Yep.
Bailey, thank you so much.
Oh,
This was
you're welcome.
amazing. My mind is bending in many ways, and thank you for who you are.
Yeah, thank you for hosting this podcast. All her listeners, it was a pleasure to meet you guys. Peace and thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Bailey.
Yep.